There's Facebook groups and forums all over the internet that ask this question every single day. And that question is, can I fit this eBay turbo kit to my stock standard D16Y without a computer, without a fuel pump, without a tune? So today we're going to try and answer that question. I honestly don't know what's going to happen, so stay tuned because we're going to put all of this in there and see what happens. So welcome back to the channel, guys. We've hit 1,000 subscribers. I couldn't be happier. And as you've just seen, yes, I do have a 100% stock standard D16 Y4 manual car that I've been tasked with fitting up this eBay kit. Now this eBay kit is pretty much the standard kit that you'll see for about $1,000 Australian, give or take, plus shipping. Every day, without fail, on a Facebook group or forum, someone posts about, hey, I want to turbo my D16. Is this kit worth it? Is this kit good? Will it work? Do I need a tune? The simple answer is, yes, you need a tune. Yes, you need injectors. Yes, you need a fuel pump. To the best of my knowledge, I'm confident that it's going to run, drive, and everything just fine. Now, this will be the 20 billionth video on YouTube about a D16Y eBay turbo kit and fit up. Mine's a little bit different. We're in Australia. Australia gets a different ECU, a different OBD port, and all that sort of stuff to you guys in the US and the rest of the world. We have a P2K ECU in our D16s. They come in a Y4 mostly. We did get many other variants, but the non-vtec most common one that you're going to see in Australia is a D16 Y4. That is without doubt the most common engine in a Civic, and without a doubt the cheapest, easiest and quickest way to get more power out of it is to add a turbo. It's cheaper than a B-swap, it's way cheaper than a K-swap, and you're going to get quite a decent amount of power increase, better than extractors, intake, exhaust, all that stuff. This will double, triple, quadruple the power that an intake and an exhaust is going to make on your D16. So that's why a lot of people talk about it, think about it, and want to do it. So let's have a look at what we've got. We have an intercooler. It's actually quite thick, around 3.5 inches thick. There is absolutely no mounting brackets or tabs, so this is going to be held up by hopes and dreams. I might possibly, depending on how confident I am, make a little plate to sort of sit underneath it to stop it dropping down. We have a adjustable fuel pressure regulator of unknown origins, and the fittings, the vacuum line and the fuel hose, so that will be fine. We've got a whole bunch of gauges. We are not going to fit those. I'm not an auto sparky, not even a mechanic. We're not going to fit those up because there's no mounting cups or gauge brackets or anything like that in the car. We have an oil catch can, a very generic one. It'll do the job, so we're going to use that. The manifold with the screamer pipe fitting. Here is the external wastegate, so we're going to use that. I didn't see any fittings for it, but I'm sure they're around here somewhere. A bleed valve boost controller. Now this is the Wuhan War Whistle Spinny Boy turbo. It is a very old school T3 T4, very big exhaust housing. It's going to not come on boost until very late. So you can see that is the T3 flange, and this is a T4 compressor side. Got a nice looking stainless downpipe. We've got the screamer pipe. We've got a suspicious blow-off valve that looks just like a HKS one. Oil feed line, oil return line. They've sent us an aluminium oil bung, which I won't be able to get that welded on. I'll have to buy another one and weld that onto the sump pan, because the sump pan's metal, not alloy. And we have the intercooler kit. I do have this spare engine and block, which I'm going to test fit the manifold and the downpipe on and make sure that goes through, and just check how much room and clearance we've got. But the first step is to clear all this out of the road. I'm going to jack the car up, remove the bumper, and then we're going to get started on checking the health of the motor. All right, so let's take a look at the car that we'll be working on today. It is 100% stock standard EK1 98 model hatchback. The hatchback has really small brakes without the strengthening brace on the caliper. No sway bar, no tacho. This car's got 195,500 Ks. It is a manual and it's 100% stock, so it's going to be great for us to turbo and play around with. I'm going to quickly just pull the plugs, check the compression. So cylinder 1 compression is just a touch under 200, which is pretty good, pretty healthy. Cylinder 2 under 200 psi as well, so that's great. So to give you guys an idea of the condition of the spark plugs that are coming out and going straight back in this guy, so these are old plugs. What I'm doing is I'm giving them a clean and I'm gapping them down to 0.8 and putting them straight back in. Okay, cylinder number 3, so between 190 and 200. Last but not least, cylinder number 4 is just a pinch over 200. So with that, we'll check the coolant. Yep, she full. Check the oil, even though we're going to change it. Due for a change, pretty dirty. She's not milky. Compression is good. Time to stick on a turbo. Now that we've deemed that the engine is healthy with 200 psi across all cylinders, nice and even, aside from the filthy dirty plugs, which I do recommend changing, they are pretty flogged out, to be honest. I wouldn't run them in my car, but that's what we have, so that's what we're using. We're going to go ahead, remove the airbox, remove the front bumper, remove the exhaust manifold and the front pipe, and just get rid of all that stuff and empty out the engine bay. Ta-da! Everything's off, bumper's off, intake manifold and front pipe is off. Airbox is gone, the little airbox resonator down here is gone. There is the pile of junk that you need to remove from the car. So now that that's done, the fun part begins. I'm thinking that we're 99.999999999% sure we're going to remove the air conditioning. First, we're going to put that all over here on the mock-up engine, and I'll show you where it all goes. So here we have the turbo mocked up on the engine. Now, what is wrong with this picture? Well, let me tell you, there's heaps wrong with it. For starters, the bolts that you get are way too long, so I'm going to need to trim 6 or 7 mil off the end of each of those bolts. They should have given you studs, but they didn't. There was bolts there. The oil drain is at the top and the oil feed is at the bottom, so I need to clock the whole turbo all the way around. The compressor housing is facing out the bumper bar, and the screamer pipe is so close to the air intake, so it's going to be literally putting hot exhaust gas straight out here, straight down to the ground, but also exactly where the air filter should go, or the air intake should go. And it does not supply you with a filter or a cover or any piping for this. The other issue we have is this is the engine block, and this is where everything is situated here in the engine. We've got the power steering, which we should be able to keep that. Definitely the dump tube's going to go there, the compressor's going to go there. It's going to be putting, everything is going to be basically here in the road. So we've got to remove the air conditioning units, all gone, all the brackets for that. I've got to clock the turbo around, and then we can look at seeing if it's going to actually fit in there and work. Now, it did come with this extra fitting, which will either put the wastegate here or here. I played around with this, and if I do use that on that side, it's going to sort of point the exhaust out there or back that way. If I put it on here, it's also not going to work because of where the exhaust is going to be pointed. eBay, what are you doing? Far out. Poorly designed. Everything's super long, which it's not the end of the world, but just means you got to chop it all. After a lot of mucking around, I've managed to remove the air conditioning. I've shortened all of the bolts that needed to be shortened, and I've mocked everything up in the engine bay for now. We do have a few problems. So I've clocked the turbo, that's fine. I've clocked the housing. I figured out that that pointed straight down, which is fine. You can see exactly how much room isn't there, and there's no room for an air filter or anything. It's going to make turbo noises, and that's what everyone wants. First issue, is the wastegate dump tube. That's going to pretty much be touching on here. I'm going to try and screw that in as much as I can, which is the boost reference, but that can really only go down in Australia. You could do the boosted boys straight out the bonnet, which, yep, it's awesome and cool, but definitely illegal. The second problem is they didn't send me enough silicon, so I don't have a piece of silicon that's going to join those two. So that's 2.5 inch. I've got one joiner there and one joiner there. What I'm going to have to do to help them out is to chop up this elbow that I used to use on my car, and I'll cut off about 3 or 4 inches of that and use that instead. I'll have to send him the bill because it was an expensive elbow. The third or fourth or 15th problem is the piping kit doesn't fit, but that's okay. What I'm going to do under here, you can see this straight. I'm going to trim that down and then use this elbow to go into here. I don't know what I'm going to do about brackets for the intercooler yet. I'm just going to see how that sits. Once it's all bolted in place, it's probably going to knock and rattle and everything. The exhaust downpipe looks like it's going to fit up. Famous last words, it looks like it is. I'm going to have to remove this bracket here, but that flex coupler is pretty decent. It's going to help me adjust everything around so it's going to work. It's really not that hard. It just takes a lot of time and stuffing around. More issues with the eBay kit with the gasket on and everything set up ready to bolt down. You can only get 1 or 2 threads started on the nut and it won't tighten down any more than that. So tomorrow I've got to go and get new studs. Fun times. Fun bloody times. With the intercooler piping, I've had to shorten these. Luckily I had a bead roller, so I've rolled the ends so they won't slip off under boost. I had to shorten the other one quite a lot, but I guess I'll make use of the daylight and get to work fitting this thing, which is a pain in the bum. It's the oil feed line. You've got to get down in behind the back of the engine, and yeah, I'll show you where it goes on the other motor in just a second. So for the next piece of the install, and for some people, especially myself, I find this to be the most challenging part, which is getting to the back of the engine and fitting the oil feed line. But luckily for you guys, I have this engine here and I can show you where it goes. So it's very difficult to do on the car. You've got a box here and there's not much room. That's where your factory breather is. The oil filter, you'll need to take that off. And so this fitting is going to screw in the back there, something like this, hopefully. So then you take your oil feed line and then snake it through and then get it on there somehow, and that doesn't want to spin, so yeah, good luck. That's going to be fun. Now I've got to do that under the car in the dark where I can't see, and yep, awesome times coming up. Then it just simply runs the oil straight across into the top of the turbo. So not too complicated, just very tricky to get down in there and do. So it's the next day. I've got the bung welded on the sump. I had to buy a steel fitting, get that centered on there. I decided to go with placement just above and across from the ridge here in the sump, so just between the 2 bolts, so around about there. And you can see that just down under there. I've got some brackets made up for the intercooler, which are just a Bunnings job. I've had to replace this silicon coupler here with one that I had. I've gotten some extra long manifold studs so I can finally mount the turbo. Everything's ready to go back in the engine bay for the final once over. But just to recap, the screamer pipe, I had to use all of these flanges to space that out enough to clear just here, which is the boost reference. The screamer pipe goes directly in front of the air intake, meaning that you can't put a silicon bend or an air filter on there. It's going to be basically dumping flames and exhaust gas straight out here, whilst at the same time, when this is cracking and opening, that means it's on full boost. So this thing's sucking as much as it possibly can. So it's pretty much going to just suck flames straight into the air intake. There's nothing you can do about it with this design. This really needs to be bent around and then go down behind here and join the downpipe, or at worst case come straight down between this gap here and down a bit further onto the ground, maybe down to about here somewhere under the sump. If I turn it around and point it straight up, it'll go straight out the bonnet, which is what you see everyone in America do, but unfortunately that's pretty much jail time here in Australia, so you don't want to do that. Even this is, you know, verging on going to jail, but they'll definitely give you a massive fine for using that. It is what it is. This is the kit. I'm hot and sweaty, so I'm going to get this ready and slam it in the car, finish getting everything done. The intercooler is really nice and thick and looks like pretty good quality, but it's really short and stumpy as far as the height goes, but the thickness is almost about 4 inches. There was nowhere to put brackets except for these weird tabs which I drilled out. Most intercoolers come with little tabs in here, and you can just screw some bolts down and put some brackets in top and bottom. This kit could benefit from a narrower intercooler that was a bit taller. That way it would fit in better. I haven't tried the bumper on yet. That's going to be my next hurdle. I'm pretty sure this is going to be flat right up against. I'm going to have to trim quite a fair bit of that away and bend this back as far as it will go. Well, here you have it, guys. The kit is all bolted on. I've got the wastegate plumbed up just to wastegate pressure. I've checked that's the softest spring, so it's going to be running the least amount of boost possible. What that is, I don't know. There's no paperwork in the kit. I've got the dodgy spaces in here with the screamer pipe pointing just down through there. The intercooler is on, mounted nice and center. Hopefully the front bar fits. Blow off valve is on, plumbed in just to the back of the manifold there. Fuel pressure regulator is on, catch can is on. So there still are some issues with this kit. The exhaust, although it fits and looks good, it doesn't match up to the factory systems. So 100% the owner needs to get a exhaust put on there. So that's a must. The factory O2 sensor just here is very, very close to the drive shaft, and I fear that when the exhaust is put up straight, it's going to pretty much be rubbing on that and probably wear through the wire. I've got that moved out of the road as much as I can. All these fittings are great. They worked out well. The major issue, and the thing that I'm really scared about, is this fitting here on top. It's not letting me tighten it all the way up. It's sort of bottoming out. This alloy is so soft, I think it's probably stripping that, even though it's not even getting tight. So we'll just see when I start the car up. Far out, I hope that doesn't pour oil everywhere. It's going to sound really bad because there's no exhaust. It's straight out the turbo downpipe. About. That's going to be an issue. At least we've got oil pressure. The fuel pressure is a little bit low, so I'm going to adjust that. There we go, that's set. Wastegate's slightly open, just at idle. Oh yeah, that's how much oil's come out just through that very, very short run. I don't know what I'm going to do about that. The car can't really be driven because it'll drain the oil out almost immediately. It's not too loud, so you could probably drive it home if it wasn't for that. Let me see what I've got in my toolbox to try and fix that and get it on the road. Bloody eBay turbo kits. So I managed to find in my toolbox a spare one of these, which is the fitting that goes in the top of the T3 T4 turbo. It's nice and tight, it's not leaking. I cable tied down the line so it sits nice and doesn't move around and rub on the bonnet. Take 2, let's start her up. We're about to see if you can buy an eBay kit straight off the shelf, slap it on your D16 with no fuel pump, no tune, no upgraded injectors, and see if it runs and drives. What I've done is I've temporarily hooked up the boost controller, the vacuum gauge at the moment. We're going to take it for a run just for a kilometre or 2 and see how it goes. I'm going to mount you guys on the windscreen and you can see how it drives, and I'll let you know what boost it's getting. So we're about to give the car its first hit with boost. The vacuum gauge is working fine, so let's see if it makes any positive boost. Flat to the floor, second gear. That looked like it made about 1 or 2 PSI. Check engine light is on. We hit the limiter. So yes, you can drive the car. It'll drive normal once the exhaust is fixed. I can't hear the turbo spooling at all. So everything's bolted up correctly. Don't have any boost leaks, I don't believe. We'll check them soon. I don't think any pipes came off. Doesn't go too bad. We're making on the first gauge, so the first stroke, so 0, 1, 2, 3, there's 4, so about 2.5 or 3 PSI. That's all I'm going to give it. I don't want to blow up the car. It's stock injectors, stock fuel pump, untuned. Can't hear the turbo at all. I think it's too big and it's probably not really spooling very well, or if at all. So it's not really coming on boost. Alright, we'll give it one more full send, see what happens. Yeah, nothing really. It's sort of getting to 0, 1, 2 or 3 PSI. Honestly, I don't know what's wrong with it. All the pipes were connected when I checked. Time to pack it up. First drive's done. We literally went less than 1 kilometre just around the streets near my house. The turbo's leaking oil out of the front of the compressor, which is no good, just really poor quality turbo. It doesn't spin at idle. I don't know why that is, maybe it's just too big. There it is, and that's how it looks with the front mount. I had to cut all of the trim out of the front of the bar, which was not something that I would have wanted to do, but there was no other way of getting it in there. You can see how close everything is. So all of that stuff had to come out. Even down this side had to trim a little bit extra out, but I did the very, very best I could. You can see everything's just getting hot for the first time. There's no oil leaks from what I can see. It's got fresh oil, gapped plugs. I'll have to adjust the fuel pressure. It's changing again, which is weird. Shouldn't really change once you've set it, but it did. So in the interest of science, I've decided to swap out the wastegate spring for the one that I believe to be the stronger one, hoping that we'll close the wastegate and allow the car to make boost and spool. So I'm going to take it for one more drive and make sure that everything's fine with the car. And then it actually makes more than 2 PSI boost. All right, let's give it a full send. second gear. Still only making 2 pounds by the looks of it with a different spring. I might put both of them in and see what happens then. I think we made about 4 psi then. That's alright. Now I have 2 wastegate springs in there, so a 5-pound spring allegedly and a 10-pound spring allegedly, which means we should be making around about 15 psi. Second gear, send it. Nothing, still about 4 psi with both springs in there. Every time it hits the limiter, it throws on the engine light, but you turn the car on and off and it goes away. So hey, the blow off valve went off. Yoo-hoo! Well, that looked like 6 psi then. Yesterday, after the first test drive of the car and only making around about 2 psi, I was pretty disappointed, pretty defeated. I packed the car up, I let the owner know the car was finished and it wasn't really making much boost, and I listed all the issues that we were having and let him know about them. In the name of science, I woke up this morning and I decided to swap the wastegate springs, take it for another drive to see what would happen. We managed to make around about 4 psi, sometimes, not all the time, which again leads me to believe that the wastegate is just junk. In a last ditch effort to make boost and bring the boost and spool up, which is how I roll, I decided to put both springs in there. Now, according to Google, Rev 9 wastegate comes in the kit, which looked exactly the same as the kit that I unboxed, has a 5 psi spring and a 10 psi spring. Neither of them went over 4 psi. So I put them both together, hoping that I'd get around about 8 to 10 psi just to see what would happen. We managed to crack 6 psi, which is pretty weak. Again, leads me to believe that there is an issue with the wastegate. It's plumbed exactly how it's supposed to be according to Google, straight out of the turbo into the bottom. Now, the kit does come with a boost controller. I've left that in the box. I'm not going to throw that on because you can put that in there. It's very simple to do, and he can wind the boost up and down as much as he wants. I just wanted to show you guys what would happen if you bolted a turbo kit straight on to a stock standard D16. This one's a D16 Y4, so the most common one that you'll see in all of Australia. It's the same engine that I'm running in my car. I've come to the conclusion that the engine light comes on because of positive boost pressure with the map sensor. So maybe if you just swap that out to a 4-bar from eBay for 20 or 30 bucks, maybe that might do the trick. I'm not sure if the ECU will then know how to read that and calibrate it. One thing worth mentioning is the narrow band oxygen sensor that comes out on all standard cars only works between a certain range of air-fuel ratio mixture. Anything above that or anything below that will also throw engine light codes and also cause the car to either throw heaps of fuel in or pull heaps of fuel out. It doesn't really know, so it's constantly going over that band, the narrow band, and throwing all different random amounts of fuel in. So it's really not ideal and not safe to drive. However, driving this car, it does seem to drive normally. It's definitely got way more power than a stock standard D16. You can definitely feel there is a power increase. Most of the time we're at 0, so atmospheric, which is the air here. It's not under vacuum, so the engine's not sucking in air and it's not getting boosted in, pushing in air. So it's just at atmosphere. So it definitely makes more power like that. Once it does give that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 psi of extra boost, it does pick up even more power again and goes even better, but that's probably because it's really lean and really unsafe. I've recommended to the vehicle owner to take the car, get the exhaust fixed, reroute the wastegate, probably look at replacing the wastegate. That might be a good start. It might help things out a bit, help control the boost a bit better, and definitely fuel injectors, fuel pump, and an ECU. And then there's no reason why this car won't absolutely hammer and fly and rip everyone and just be an absolute ball to drive. The install part's done, the dirty job's been done. Overall, the condition of the engine and car is quite good. I did notice a lot of differences between my GLI sedan and this CXI hatch. First was the standard brakes, drums in the rear, no caliper bracket on the front rotors, and they're much smaller. So the sedan comes with 262mm. These are 239mm rotors with a much smaller caliper, so definitely those need an upgrade now that we're having more power. One thing that I don't really like is the intercooler. It's really fat, therefore you have to pretty much chop out all of the front bumper bar, and the way the cooler pipes go, you pretty much need to remove a corner section there too, which absolutely made me cringe. I hated doing it. I actually feel really bad for the vehicle owner having to chop so much of the front bumper away. It kind of destroys that sleeper effect. I don't know if he was going for that or not, or whether he wanted to show off that he's got a turbo, but there's really no choice with the intercooler that comes in this kit. You've got piping that's hanging out in weird angles, and the intercooler core is around about 4 inches thick, which is monstrous. That's what 1,000+ horsepower GTRs run, but it's about 5 inches tall and about 4 inches thick, so around about 10 or 11 centimeters wide and about 15 centimeters tall. Could have just been a little bit better design. I really like the way these pipes go around on the cold side. You know, it's very neat and very tidy. This manifold I recommend as well. It was fine. It brings the turbo far enough away from the block that you don't have to grind anything, and you can fit quite large turbos on there, so that's great. If I was going to do a kit like this on a car that I owned, I'd probably get rid of that wastegate and just run a internally wastegated turbo, probably a little bit smaller. This is a T3, T4, and it's just way too big. It doesn't even really spool. You can't hear it at idle. It doesn't spin. Like, absolutely flogging the car to get to 6 psi. Made a tiny little squeak out of the blow-off valve, and you could barely hear it there. There's no room for an air filter. What I would recommend is, once you've rerouted the wastegate screamer pipe, get that out of the road, I would probably then put a silicon 90 here and then put an air filter or something there, but you probably need to trim away some of that radiator support there to get it in. Another thing to be mindful of is the supplied fuel pressure regulator. I set this at 40 psi at idle, so on vacuum. For every positive psi, it's going to increase that. So 5 psi is going to run 45 psi fuel pressure, 10 psi is going to run 50 psi fuel pressure. But after the very first drive, the fuel pressure had gone up to 60 at idle. So I don't know why that was. I've turned it back down, I've locked it in again. Just try and make sure at idle you're around about 35 to 40 psi on your fuel pressure regulator. I hope this finally answers the question, can I buy the eBay kit, bolt it on my car and drive? The answer is yes, you can. I'm a little bit surprised. Pretty much the turbo, the wastegate, all of that sort of stuff needs to be modified or customized in some way. So if you don't have a lot of tools, you're going to have a hard time and you're going to be in a world of hurt. I think after you factor in the labor costs and the modification costs of modifying this kit to fit and make sure everything bolts up snugly, it's probably going to work out the same as if you bought an intercooler, a turbo, a manifold and some piping, and then took it to a shop and got them to do it, because they're going to have to customize quite a bit of this anyway and spend a lot of time figuring things out and moving things around and making them fit. Whereas if they just build it themselves and do it right once, you're going to have a much better result. You're going to make more power and it's going to look nicer, it's going to fit better, and it's going to run better. Surprisingly, the car didn't totally shut down. Because this car doesn't have a tacho, I don't know if it actually did rev all the way out to 7,000 and hit a rev limiter, or whether it came on boost and then the engine cut. I'm not sure what that was. This car does not have a tacho, so it's another thing to look out for on a hatch, is make sure you get a tacho, or do what I did and buy a sedan, much better equipped from the factory, so hopefully it drives up the price of all the sedans. So just to recap, the exhaust doesn't fit, the manifold studs were too short, it didn't come with enough silicone hose, it didn't come with some of the right fittings, you need to have a bung welded on, you need to be able to cut pipe, bead roll pipe, weld the exhaust up, weld the bung onto the sump. If you can do all of that stuff, there's absolutely no reason why I couldn't have had this kit bolted on in an afternoon. Not to toot my own horn, it was pretty straightforward. It came with absolutely no instructions, but because I've done this once or twice before, I kind of figured it out. Really straightforward. The air conditioning 100% must come out. Otherwise, pretty straightforward. You can drive, you can run it. Not for very long. I wouldn't recommend revving the car or boosting it or smashing it off limiter or anything like that. You can definitely daily the car around, off boost, no problem, drives fine. Anyway, I hope you like the content. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you do. Take your grubby fingers, click like, click subscribe, and we'll see ya in the next video.